Sometimes, the hardest lessons come from the quietest warriors. Follow the journey of a prankster who thought he could break an unbreakable spirit, only to find himself transformed by the power of unwavering dignity. This is a story about pride, humility, and the true meaning of strength. Like and subscribe for more inspiring content that challenges perspectives and touches hearts. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories of transformation and growth. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Kensington Palace, where centuries of tradition stood guard, alongside its dedicated protectors. Among them, Sergeant Marcus Williams cut an impressive figure in his ceremonial uniform. Crimson jacket pristine, brass buttons gleaming, and black bearskin cap adding to his already commanding presence. For 6 years, he had served with unwavering dedication, earning respect from his peers and admiration from visitors who flocked to the palace gates daily. Marcus stood motionless, his eyes fixed forward, embodying the discipline that had become second nature after years of rigorous training. To tourists, he might have appeared like a perfectly crafted statue, but beneath that stillness lay an acute awareness of everything around him. Every movement, every sound, every potential threat. Nothing escaped his notice. The morning crowd was typical. Families taking photos, tour guides sharing historical facts, and the occasional attempt by visitors to provoke a reaction from the guards. Marcus had seen it all. Funny faces, ridiculous dances, even amateur comedians trying their luck at getting him to crack a smile. None had succeeded. To him, this wasn't just a job or a tourist attraction, it was a sacred duty passed down through generations of soldiers who had stood this same watch. But this particular morning carried a different energy. Marcus sensed it in the way some tourists kept checking their phones, whispering excitedly and glancing toward the palace gates. His instincts, honed by years of service, told him something was brewing. That's when Ryan Cooper made his entrance. Ryan was everything Marcus wasn't. Loud, flashy, and perpetually performing for an audience that existed primarily in the digital world. With his carefully styled hair, designer streetwear, and the latest camera equipment, he looked more like a fashion influencer than the notorious prankster he had become. Behind him, his loyal crew, Jake Martinez manning the primary camera and Emily Chen coordinating the shoot, moved with practiced precision. "What's up, squad?" Ryan's voice boomed across the courtyard as he faced Jake's camera. "Today, we're about to create absolute chaos at one of London's most famous spots. You guys have been bombing my comments, asking me to take on these supposedly unshakable royal guards. Well, guess what? Your boy Ryan's about to deliver." The growing crowd of onlookers pulled out their phones, recognizing the famous prankster from his viral videos. With over 5 million subscribers and a reputation for pushing boundaries, Ryan had built his empire on making others uncomfortable for entertainment. His latest videos had been trending worldwide, each one more daring than the last. Marcus remained still, but his trained eye had already assessed Ryan and his crew. He noticed the expensive equipment, the practiced way they positioned themselves for optimal shots, and most importantly, the calculated look in Ryan's eyes. This wasn't just another tourist looking for a quick laugh. This was someone who had planned their move. "All right, squad, let's see what it takes to make one of these guards crack," Ryan announced, adjusting his wireless microphone. "They think they're so tough with their fancy uniforms and serious faces, but everyone has a breaking point, am I right?" The crowd's energy shifted, some excited to witness potential entertainment, others uncomfortable with the disrespect about to unfold. Emily checked her tablet, likely monitoring the live stream numbers as they climbed. Jake circled wider, capturing both Ryan and Marcus in frame. What Ryan didn't notice, but Marcus did, was the subtle movement of 3 plainclothes guards, positioning themselves strategically around the courtyard. David Thompson casually leaned against a pillar, appearing to check his phone. James Anderson sat on a bench, pretending to read a newspaper. Christopher Miller blended in with a tour group, camera in hand like any other tourist. The stage was set. Ryan Cooper, self-proclaimed king of pranks, was about to learn that some traditions don't bend, some lines shouldn't be crossed, and some lessons come at a price higher than viral fame. Little did he know, this wouldn't be just another video. For his channel, this would be the day that changed everything. Ryan Cooper approached Marcus with the confident swagger of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. The morning crowd had grown larger, drawn by the anticipation of what was about to unfold. Phones raised in unison, creating a forest of screens all aimed at the imminent confrontation. All right, squad, Operation Make the Guard Move is officially underway, Ryan announced to his camera, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of a seasoned performer. Let's start with something classic, shall we? Jake positioned himself perfectly to capture both Ryan and Marcus in frame, while Emily monitored the live stream chat exploding with excitement. The viewer count was climbing rapidly, exactly what Ryan had hoped for. Watch this, Ryan whispered to the camera before beginning his performance. He started with exaggerated marching, mimicking Marcus's stance, but adding ridiculous flourishes. The crowd's laughter encouraged him, phones recording every moment. But Marcus remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward, showing no sign that he even registered Ryan's presence. Tough crowd, huh? Ryan grinned at his audience. Don't worry, we're just getting started. He moved closer, now standing directly in Marcus's line of sight. Ryan began a series of increasingly absurd faces, crossing his eyes, puffing out his cheeks, sticking out his tongue. Each new expression drew more laughter from the growing audience. What Ryan didn't notice was the subtle tightening of Marcus's jaw, the only visible response to the disrespect being shown. Years of training had taught Marcus to remain still under any provocation, but that didn't mean he was oblivious to the mounting tension. "Hey, Emily," Ryan called out. "What's the chat saying?" Emily glanced at her tablet, scanning the rapid-fire comments. "They're loving it, Ryan. They want you to try harder, though. They say he's too easy to handle." Ryan's eyes lit up at the challenge. "Too easy? Well, we can't have that, can we?" He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker. The crowd murmured in anticipation as he placed it on the ground near Marcus's feet. Suddenly, the sound of a cartoon trumpet filled the air, followed by exaggerated marching music. Ryan began to dance around Marcus, his movements deliberately clumsy and mocking. The crowd's laughter grew louder, phones recording every second of the spectacle. "Come on, big guy," Ryan taunted, still dancing. "Even the Queen would crack." A smile at this. He continued his performance, each move more elaborate than the last, but Marcus remained unmoved. What the cameras didn't capture, but Marcus's trained eye did, was the subtle repositioning of the plainclothes guards. David Thompson had moved closer, casually taking photos with his phone. James Anderson had switched benches, maintaining his cover while getting a better view of the situation. Christopher Miller had separated from his tour group, now standing near a possible exit route. Ryan, oblivious to this tactical dance, decided to escalate further. He pulled out a small, remote-controlled car from his bag, a new prop he'd brought specifically for this video. "All right, squad, time to kick things up a notch. Let's see how our stoic friend handles a little traffic around his feet." The crowd's excitement peaked as Ryan started controlling the car, making it weave between Marcus's boots. The tiny vehicle buzzed around, its electric motor whirring as it circled the guard's feet. Still, Marcus didn't move, though his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his rifle. "Man, this guy's good," Ryan admitted to the camera, but his tone suggested he was far from finished. "But everyone has a breaking point, right? And your boy Ryan always finds it, Emily called out from behind her tablet. The views are insane. Ryan, we're trending in 3 countries already. This news seemed to fuel Ryan's determination. He pocketed the remote control and approached Marcus again, this time pulling out his phone for a selfie. Hey man, smile for the gram. He positioned himself right next to Marcus, making sure to get the guard's stoic expression in frame. The flash went off repeatedly as Ryan took several photos, each one pushing the boundaries of personal space a little further. What Ryan failed to notice was the subtle communication happening around him. David Thompson had made brief eye contact with Marcus, receiving an almost imperceptible nod in return. James Anderson had sent a quick text, and Christopher Miller had moved to cover another strategic position. You know what, squad? Ryan addressed his audience again, his confidence growing with each successful provocation. I think it's time for our signature move. You know what I'm talking about. The crowd watched with a mixture of anticipation and unease as Ryan reached into his bag once more.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
This time, he pulled out what appeared to be a small prop cane, a staple in his previous prank videos. Now, for those new to the squad, this is our famous trip stick, Ryan explained to the camera. Totally harmless, but guaranteed to get a reaction every time. Watch and learn. Jake moved to get a better angle as Ryan positioned himself a few feet away from Marcus. The plan was simple. Pretend to trip and fall toward the guard, using the cane as a prop. It was a prank he'd pulled countless times before, always resulting in the target flinching or breaking character to help him. What Ryan didn't know was that Marcus had been trained for exactly these types of situations. The guard had already analyzed the fake cane, assessed Ryan's stance, and prepared for multiple possible scenarios, all without moving a muscle. Here we go, squad, Ryan announced, beginning his performance. He started walking casually past Marcus, then suddenly pretended to stumble. The cane clattered against the ground as Ryan dramatically flailed his arms, falling toward the guard in what looked like an uncontrolled tumble. The crowd gasped, phones raised high to capture what they thought would be the moment the guard finally broke his stance. But Marcus didn't move. Instead, something entirely unexpected happened. Just as Ryan was about to make contact with Marcus, David Thompson smoothly stepped in from the side, catching Ryan's arm and steadying him with what appeared to be a helpful tourist's gesture. The movement was so natural, so perfectly timed, that most of the crowd didn't even realize what had actually happened. Whoa, thanks, man, Ryan said to David, still in performance mode. But as he looked up to meet David's eyes, something in the man's steady gaze made him pause. There was a professional calm there, a controlled power that felt eerily familiar. David smiled politely, still maintaining his tourist facade, and spoke in a low voice that only Ryan could hear. Careful. Now, wouldn't want anyone to get hurt, would we? The words were friendly enough, but something in the tone made Ryan's confidence waver for the first time. He glanced back at Marcus, who hadn't moved an inch, then at David, who was already walking away, blending back into the crowd as if nothing had happened. Right, Ryan said, trying to recover his showman's attitude. Well, squad, looks like we'll have to try something else. This guard's got some serious skills, I'll give him that. But as he turned to face his camera again, Ryan noticed something that made his stomach twist slightly. James Anderson was now standing directly in Jake's line of sight, casually looking at his phone. Christopher Miller had somehow appeared near Emily, apparently fascinated by something on his own device. For the first time, Ryan felt a flicker of uncertainty. He looked around the courtyard, suddenly aware of how many tourists seemed to be paying very close attention to his show while appearing not to watch at all. Ryan Cooper stood back for a moment, trying to shake off his growing unease. The courtyard felt different somehow, more confined despite its sprawling size. He glanced at his crew, noticing how Jake's camera movements had become more hesitant, how Emily's excitement had dimmed slightly. "Hey, squad," Ryan said, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. "Looks like we need to step up our game. This guard's proving to be quite the challenge, but you know me. I never back down." The live stream chat was exploding with suggestions, each one more outrageous than the last. Emily scanned through them, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Ryan," she called out softly, "maybe we should wrap this up. We've got plenty of content already." But Ryan wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on Marcus, studying the guard's impeccable stance, the way his discipline seemed to mock Ryan's every attempt at provocation. Something had shifted in Ryan's mind. This was no longer just about creating content. It had become personal. "Time for Plan B," Ryan announced, reaching into his bag again. This time he pulled out a small drone equipped with a camera. The crowd murmured with renewed interest as he set it up, some people backing away to give. "It's space. Let's see how our friend handles a little aerial reconnaissance." Ryan grinned at the camera. He powered up the drone, its small propellers whirring to life. "Don't worry, squad, it's totally legal. I checked." What Ryan hadn't noticed was the subtle exchange of glances between the plainclothes guards. David Thompson had already pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over a number. James Anderson had positioned himself closer to the palace's security office, while Christopher Miller maintained his position near Emily. Ryan began piloting the drone, keeping it just far enough away to avoid immediate intervention. The small device hovered around Marcus, its camera capturing every angle of the stoic guard. The crowd's phones followed the drone's movement, creating a symphony of clicking sounds and flashing lights. "Look at this view, squad," Ryan narrated as he maneuvered the drone. "Our friend here looks even more statue-like from above. But everyone has a weakness, right?" He guided the drone lower, closer to Marcus's face. The guard remained motionless, but there was a new tension in the air. The crowd's excitement had taken on a nervous edge, as if they sensed a line was about to be crossed. That's when Ryan made his fatal mistake. "Let's give him a little breeze," he announced, directing the drone to hover directly in front of Marcus's face. The propellers created a small wind that ruffled the fur on the guard's bearskin cap. A few strands came loose, dancing in the artificial wind. The crowd gasped. Even Jake lowered his camera slightly, uncertain about capturing what was happening. Emily stepped forward, about to intervene, but Christopher Miller's presence somehow kept her rooted to the spot. "Ryan!" she called out, her voice urgent now. "The comments are turning negative. People are saying this is too far." But Ryan was lost in his own world, focused entirely on getting a reaction from Marcus. He moved the drone even closer, its whirring propellers now mere inches from the guard's face. "Come on," Ryan muttered, more to himself than his audience. "Just blink, just move. Something." That's when everything changed. In one fluid motion, David Thompson stepped forward, hand raised to shield his eyes from the sun. A movement that perfectly intercepted the drone's flight path. The small aircraft wobbled, its propellers catching the sleeve of David's jacket. "Oh, I'm so sorry," David exclaimed, maintaining his tourist facade as the drone clattered to the ground. "Let me help you with that." But as he bent to retrieve the drone, his jacket sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of a security services tattoo. Ryan's eyes widened as realization began to dawn. He looked around frantically, suddenly seeing the courtyard through new eyes. James Anderson was no longer pretending to read his newspaper. His stance had shifted to something more alert, more professional. Christopher Miller had moved closer, his tourist camera now hanging forgotten around his neck. And Marcus hadn't moved an inch, but somehow his stillness felt different now, more purposeful, more threatening. Squad. Ryan's voice cracked slightly as he addressed his camera. Looks like we might need to take a quick break. Technical difficulties, you know how it is. But before he could signal Jake to cut the stream, David stepped into frame, the drone held carefully in his hands. "You dropped something," he said, his voice carrying the same professional calm as before, but now with an edge that made Ryan's skin crawl. "Thanks." Ryan reached for the drone, but David's grip remained firm. "You know," David continued, his voice low enough that only Ryan and the nearby crew could hear, "there are regulations about flying drones near royal properties, very specific regulations. Would you like me to explain them to you?" Ryan swallowed hard, his showman's confidence evaporating. "No, that's okay. We were just leaving anyway." "Were you?" David's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But you seem so determined to get a reaction. It would be a shame to leave before the shows really started." That's when Ryan noticed something that made his blood run cold. Marcus had moved, not much, just a slight turn of his head, barely noticeable to the casual observer. But his eyes were now fixed directly on Ryan, and in them was a promise of consequences that no words could adequately convey. The crowd, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to disperse. Some lingered at the edges, phones still recording, but the excited energy had been replaced by something more uncomfortable. "Emily," Ryan called out, trying to keep his voice steady, "what are the numbers looking like?" But Emily was staring at her tablet in horror. The livestream chat had exploded with negative comments. Clips of the drone incident were already being shared across social media platforms, and the backlash was building. "Ryan," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "we're trending all right, but not in the way you want. People are calling it harassment. They're saying you've gone too far." Ryan's face paled as he watched his carefully cultivated image beginning to crumble in real time. He looked back at Marcus, whose gaze hadn't wavered, then at David, who was still holding the drone with that knowing smile. "Okay," Ryan said, raising his hands in surrender. "You win. We're done here. No harm done, right?" David's smile widened slightly. "Oh, I wouldn't say that. You see, the show's just beginning." And this time, he gestured subtly to the numerous phones still recording, "You're not the one in control of the narrative." Ryan Cooper's retreat from the palace grounds wasn't the triumphant exit he'd imagined. Instead of leading a parade of laughing followers, he found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows. Jake trudged behind him, camera lowered, while Emily frantically worked damage control on her tablet. "It's bad, Ryan," Emily reported as they walked. "The clips are everywhere. People are calling you the palace pest. Your regular followers are jumping ship, and the mainstream media is picking up the story." Ryan tried to maintain his confident facade, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "It'll blow over. Everything. Does we just need to—" He stopped mid-sentence. Across the street, David Thompson stood casually at a coffee cart, stirring his drink while maintaining direct eye contact with Ryan. As they watched, James Anderson emerged from a nearby shop, and Christopher Miller could be seen sitting at a bus stop, all positioned like pieces on a chessboard. "Let's get back to the hotel," Ryan muttered, quickening his pace. "We need to regroup, figure out our next move." But as they turned the corner, Ryan's phone buzzed with a notification. His hands trembled slightly as he read the message from an unknown number. "Enjoying your walk?" How did they... Ryan's voice trailed off as he spotted another plainclothes guard he hadn't seen before, casually taking photos of the architecture, or at least appearing to. Emily's tablet chimed with a social media alert. "Ryan," she said, her voice tight with concern, "someone just uploaded a compilation video. It shows every prank you've ever done that went too far, every person you've humiliated. It's going viral." "What? Who posted it?" Ryan grabbed the tablet, his face draining of color as he watched clips of his past victims, people he'd made cry, relationships he'd damaged, all for views and likes. The video was perfectly edited, showing his escalating pattern of disrespect and cruelty. Jake finally spoke up, his camera now completely packed away. "Maybe we should call it quits, Ryan. This isn't feeling right anymore." "No!" Ryan snapped, but his bravado was cracking. "We're not letting them win. We just need to..." His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Still smiling for the camera. As they reached their hotel, Ryan's social media notifications were exploding. The hashtag #PalacePest was trending, accompanied by that damning compilation video. Worse, news outlets were picking up the story, framing it as a commentary on social media culture and the cost of viral fame. "I need to respond," Ryan declared, reaching for his vlogging camera. "We'll show them they can't intimidate us. We'll..." "Ryan," Emily interrupted, her voice firm. "Look." She held up her tablet, showing security footage from the palace. It was from earlier that morning, but from angles Ryan hadn't seen, showing exactly how pathetic his pranks had looked, how uncomfortable the crowd had been, how professional the guards had remained throughout. The footage had been released officially, with a simple statement about respecting traditional institutions. "This isn't a game anymore," Emily said quietly. "They're not just guards, Ryan. They're professionals who understand modern warfare, including social media warfare." As if to emphasize her point, Ryan's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email containing a detailed list of every regulation he'd violated with his drone stunt, along with potential penalties. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear. They had everything documented. Ryan paced the hotel room, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Jake sat in a corner, reviewing footage that now looked more incriminating than entertaining. Emily's tablet kept chiming with notifications, each one worse than the last. "Look at these comments," she said, scrolling through the feed. "Remember when he made that old lady cry? What about the time he ruined that marriage proposal? They're digging up everything, Ryan." Ryan's phone buzzed yet again. He nearly dropped it in his haste to check the message, only to find a single photo. Marcus Williams, still standing at his post, perfectly composed. The caption read, "Some things don't need to move to show strength." "This has to stop," Ryan muttered, running his hands through his hair. "We need to delete the footage, issue an apology, something." But as he reached for his laptop, he realized a terrible truth. He wasn't in control anymore. He never had been. The guards hadn't just protected their post. They'd orchestrated a complete dismantling of his carefully crafted image. A knock at the door made them all jump. Ryan approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. The hallway appeared empty, except for a single envelope on the floor. With trembling hands, he opened the door and retrieved it. Inside was a single photograph, Ryan himself from years ago, before the pranks, before the fame, working at a local charity. On the back was written, "Remember who you were before you became what you thought they wanted." How did they? Ryan's voice cracked. How did they even find this? Emily looked up from her tablet, her eyes wide. "Ryan, your first video is going viral again, the one where you helped that homeless veteran. People are commenting about how you've changed, asking what happened to that person." The room fell silent as the weight of it all settled over them. The guards hadn't just defended their post. They'd launched a precise, coordinated campaign that struck at the very foundation of Ryan's carefully constructed persona. Another message arrived. A uniform isn't just cloth and buttons. It's a symbol of something greater than yourself. What do you symbolize, Ryan Cooper? Ryan sank onto the bed, his phone slipping from his fingers. For the first time in years, he saw himself clearly. Not as the confident prankster, not as the social media star, but as something else entirely. Something he didn't particularly like. "They're not going to stop, are they?" he asked quietly. Emily shook her head, still scrolling through the mounting social media disaster. They don't need to chase you or threaten you. They're just showing you who you've become, and they're letting the world see it too. The hotel room felt like it was closing in on Ryan Cooper. Every notification sound made him flinch. Every shadow outside the window seemed to hide watching eyes. Emily had finally stopped reading the comments aloud, but her silence was somehow worse. Jake sat in the corner, methodically deleting footage from his camera, evidence of a career that suddenly seemed shameful. "I need some air," Ryan announced, standing abruptly. "I'm going for a walk." "That's probably not a good idea," Emily warned, but Ryan was already heading for the door. "I can't just sit here watching everything fall apart," he snapped. "Maybe if I go live, explain my side." "Your side?" Jake spoke up, his voice uncharacteristically firm. "Ryan, have you seen what they've done? They haven't twisted anything or made things up. They've just shown the truth." The words hit Ryan like a physical blow. He stood with his hand on the doorknob, frozen in indecision. His phone buzzed again, another message from an unknown number. Sometimes standing still requires the most strength. Ryan yanked the door open, desperate to escape, only to find himself face to face with a hotel staff member holding a package. "Delivery for Mr. Cooper," the young man said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to Ryan's distress. With trembling hands, Ryan accepted the package and retreated back into the room. The brown paper wrapping was plain, with no return address. Inside, he found a USB drive and a note that read, "Watch alone." "Don't," Emily advised, but Ryan was already pulling out his laptop. The video began playing, high-quality security footage from various locations around London. Ryan watched in horror as it showed him over the past week planning his palace prank. He saw himself practicing with the drone in a park, bragging to his crew about making the guard move, even calculating the best angles for maximum humiliation. But then the footage changed, showing Marcus Williams arriving at the palace before dawn, hours before his shift. The guard moved through his preparation routine with meticulous care, each button polished, each movement precise. There was no audience, no cameras he was playing to. This was pure dedication. The video continued, splitting into multiple screens. One showed Marcus standing his post through rain and shine. Another displayed him helping a lost child find their parents during his off-duty hours, still in uniform. A third revealed him, teaching new recruits, his patience and dignity evident in every gesture. "Stop the video," Ryan whispered, but he couldn't look away. The final sequence was the most devastating, a compilation of people's reactions after Ryan had left the palace. Children asking their parents why someone would be so mean. Elderly veterans shaking their heads in disappointment. Tourists from around the world expressing disgust at the disrespect shown to a treasured tradition. The video ended with a simple message. A uniform is earned. Respect is earned. What have you earned, Ryan Cooper? Ryan closed the laptop, his hands shaking. For the first time in his career, he felt truly seen, not as the character he played for his viewers, but as the person he'd become. The reflection wasn't flattering. His phone buzzed again. This time, the message included a link to a live security feed of the palace gates. Marcus Williams still stood there, unmoved, unchanged. But now Ryan saw something different in that stillness. Not a target to be provoked, but a standard he could never meet. "I need to go back," Ryan said suddenly. "What?" Emily looked up from her tablet. "Ryan, no. The comments are getting worse. People are calling for you to be banned from social media. Some are even talking about pressing charges for harassment." "You don't understand," Ryan insisted, grabbing his jacket. "I need to." Another message arrived. "Actions speak louder than words, but silence speaks volumes." Ryan stared at his phone, understanding finally dawning. They're not just "Protecting the palace," he said slowly. "They're protecting everything it stands for. And I've been attacking that, not just today, but for years." He pulled up his own channel, scrolling through thousands of videos. Each thumbnail showed him in mid-prank, someone's moment of humiliation captured for entertainment. The view counts were massive, the likes numerous, but suddenly they felt hollow. "I used to help people," he said quietly, remembering the photo they'd sent of his charity work. "When did I stop being that person?" Emily and Jake exchanged glances, neither knowing how to respond. The room fell silent, except for the constant buzz of notifications, each one a reminder of the fortress of cards Ryan had built, now collapsing around him. A final message arrived, this one different from the rest. "The palace gates open to all who approach with respect. They remain closed only to those who seek to breach them through force." Ryan stood, his decision made. "I'm going back," he announced. "Not to film, not to prank, not to get views. I'm going back because I need to." "Ryan," Emily started, but he cut her off. "No cameras," he said firmly. "No phones, no live stream. This isn't content. This is..." He paused, searching for words he hadn't used sincerely in years. "This is an apology." As if in response to his words, one last message arrived. "Sergeant Marcus Williams begins his shift at 0600 hours. Some traditions are worth preserving, some changes are worth making." Ryan Cooper, social media prankster with millions of followers, looked at his reflection in the hotel room mirror. For the first time in years, he didn't see a content creator or an influencer. He saw someone who had lost their way and perhaps had just found a path back. The pre-dawn London air was crisp and clear as Ryan Cooper walked alone toward the palace. For the first time in years, he carried no camera, no microphone, no props, just the weight of his actions and the determination to make things right. The streets were nearly empty, creating an almost ceremonial atmosphere. As he approached the palace gates, Ryan noticed how different everything looked in the gentle morning light. Without the pressure to perform, without the need to create content, he could finally see the true majesty of the place. At precisely 0600 hours, Ryan watched from a respectful distance as Sergeant Marcus Williams took his post. The changing of the guard was a ceremony Ryan had previously seen as just another opportunity for content. Now he observed the precision, the dedication, the honor in every movement. David Thompson materialized beside him, no longer pretending to be a tourist. "Good morning, Mr. Cooper," he said quietly. "I see you received our messages." Ryan nodded, his throat tight. "I did, all of them. I need to apologize." "Do you?" David's voice was neutral. "Or do you need to understand?" Before Ryan could respond, James Anderson and Christopher Miller appeared, creating a loose circle around him. Their presence wasn't threatening anymore. Instead, it felt almost protective. "Walk with us," David suggested, though it wasn't really a suggestion. As they moved through the palace grounds, David spoke quietly about the history of the guard, the traditions they upheld, and the men and women who had stood watch through centuries of change. Ryan listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time in his life. "You saw a man standing still," David explained, "but you never saw what he was standing for." They stopped at a small memorial garden Ryan had never noticed before. The plaques bore the names of guards who had died in service, protecting not just a building, but the principles it represented. "Your video yesterday got millions of views," Christopher added. "But some things aren't about numbers, Mr. Cooper. Some things are about values." Ryan's hands trembled slightly as he read the names. "I thought I was just making content," he whispered. "I didn't think." "That's right," James interrupted firmly. "You didn't think. You saw an opportunity for entertainment where others see duty, honor, sacrifice." They led Ryan to a bench with a clear view of Marcus's post. The guard stood as he always did, perfectly, still, utterly focused. But now Ryan saw something different in that stillness, a strength that had nothing to do with physical endurance. "Yesterday," David continued, "you tried to make him move. Today, we want you to understand why he doesn't." Ryan watched as tourists began to arrive, many stopping to take photos with Marcus. Children pointed excitedly, adults smiled respectfully, veterans offered salutes. Each interaction, though, met with stillness, carried a dignity Ryan had never appreciated before. "Your followers," James said, "they watch you because you move, because you create chaos, but his stillness, that creates something else entirely. It creates stability, continuity, respect." Ryan's phone had been silent all morning. He'd turned off notifications after the barrage of the previous day. Now he pulled it out and did something he hadn't done in years. He deleted his social media apps. "That's a start," David nodded approvingly. "But it's not the end." They walked Ryan through the daily routine of a royal guard, the hours of preparation, the physical training, the historical education. They showed him the weight of the uniform, literally and figuratively. They explained the significance of each button, each movement, each tradition. "Yesterday," Christopher said, "you thought you were testing his limits, but really, you were revealing your own." As the morning wore on, tourists began to recognize Ryan from the viral videos. But instead of the adoration he was used to, he saw disappointment in their eyes, heard their whispered judgments. Some pulled their children away, others shook their heads sadly. "Your actions showed disrespect," David explained, "but they also showed something else. A generation that has forgotten the value of standing for something greater than themselves." They stopped again, this time directly in Marcus's line of sight. The guard's eyes remained forward, his posture perfect, but Ryan felt the weight of his presence more powerfully than ever. "We could press charges," James said matter-of-factly. "The drone incident alone violated several regulations, but that's not what this is about, is it?" Ryan shook his head, understanding finally settling deep in his bones. "No," he replied softly, "it's about making things right." "And how do you propose to do that?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Ryan straightened his shoulders, a plan forming in his mind. "I need to make a video," he said, then quickly added, "Not like before, not for views or likes, but because my followers need to understand what I've learned. They need to see." "What do they need to see, Mr. Cooper?" Christopher prompted. "The truth," Ryan answered simply. "About the guard, about tradition, about respect, about who I've been and who I want to be." The three plainclothes guards exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, David nodded. "Sergeant Williams completes his shift at 1400 hours, he said. "If you have something to say to him, that would be the appropriate time. But remember, actions speak louder than words." Ryan understood. He spent the next few hours sitting quietly, watching, learning. He saw the guard change shifts with perfect precision. He observed the respect shown by various visitors. He noticed the subtle ways the plainclothes guards maintained security without disrupting the public's experience. As 1400 hours approached, Ryan felt a calm certainty settle over him. For the first time in his career, he wasn't thinking about views, likes, or viral potential. He was thinking about legacy, not just his own, but the legacy of respect and tradition he had so carelessly tried to disrupt. As 1400 hours approached, Ryan Cooper stood quietly near the palace gates, his heart beating steadily in his chest. The morning's lessons weighed heavily on his mind, reshaping his understanding of not just the royal guard, but of dignity, respect, and purpose. David Thompson appeared beside him, his presence now a source of guidance rather than intimidation. "It's nearly time," he said softly. "Are you ready?" Ryan nodded, though ready felt like an inadequate word for what he was feeling. He watched as another guard approached to relieve Marcus Williams from his post, the changing of the guard. A ceremony he had once seen as merely a tourist attraction now revealed itself as a solemn transfer of responsibility, a continuation of centuries of tradition. As Marcus completed the ceremonial handover, Ryan noticed something he had missed before: the subtle pride in each movement, the quiet dignity in the exchange of duty. This wasn't a performance, it was a testament to unwavering dedication. Marcus marched away from his post with the same precision he had maintained throughout his shift. Ryan started to follow, but David held him back with a gentle hand. "Wait," David instructed. "There's a proper way to do this." They followed at a respectful distance as Marcus entered a private area of the palace grounds. Ryan noticed James Anderson and Christopher Miller had taken up positions nearby, not constraining but containing, creating a space for what needed to happen. After several minutes, Marcus emerged in his standard military uniform, absent the ceremonial guard attire, but no less impressive. His posture remained perfect, his bearing still commanding respect. He approached Ryan directly, his gaze unwavering. "Mr. Cooper," Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice steady and clear. "I believe you have something to say." Ryan had rehearsed this moment in his head 100 times since morning, but standing before Marcus, all prepared speeches fell away. Instead, truth rose to his lips, unscripted and raw. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "Not just for yesterday, but for everything I've represented. I saw your stillness as weakness because I couldn't understand my own restlessness. I sought reactions because I couldn't grasp the power of restraint." Marcus listened silently, his expression neutral but attentive. Ryan continued, the words flowing more freely now. "I built a career on making people uncomfortable, on pushing boundaries, on disrespecting traditions I never took the time to understand. I measured success in views and likes, never stopping to count the cost in dignity and respect." He gestured to the palace behind them. "Yesterday, I thought I was challenging you, but really, I was exposing everything that's wrong with what I've become. You didn't need to move to show strength. I needed to stop to see my weakness." Marcus's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Understanding," he said, "is the first step toward change." "I want to make it right," Ryan replied earnestly. "Not for views or followers, but because it's necessary. Because some things are more important than entertainment." Marcus exchanged a glance with David, who nodded slightly. "Your audience," Marcus said, "they follow you because you lead. The question is, where have you been leading them?" The words hit Ryan like a physical force. He thought about his millions of followers, mostly young people who had watched him disrespect people and traditions for entertainment. He had been leading them, but toward what? "I want to show them something different," Ryan said firmly. "Not another prank or joke, but truth. Would you help me?" Marcus considered this for a moment, then spoke with careful precision. "The uniform I wear represents more than tradition. It represents the choice to stand for something greater than oneself." "What do you stand for, Mr. Cooper?" Ryan felt the weight of the question deep in his soul. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I want to find out. I want to understand what makes someone choose to stand still in a world that's always demanding movement." A small smile touched Marcus's lips, the first real expression Ryan had seen from him. "Then perhaps that's where your new story begins." With a nod to David, Marcus retrieved something from a nearby office, a garment bag. "This," he said, holding it carefully, is a spare dress uniform. It weighs approximately 8 kilograms. Every button must be polished, every seam straight, every movement precise. Would you like to understand what that feels like? Ryan's eyes widened. You'd let me, not to wear on duty, Marcus clarified, but to understand. Sometimes, Mr. Cooper, the best lessons come from walking in another's shoes, or in this case, standing in their boots. What followed was an hour of instruction unlike anything Ryan had ever experienced. Marcus taught him the basics of standing. At attention, the proper way to hold the ceremonial rifle, the meaning behind each aspect of the uniform. David, James, and Christopher added their own insights, building a complete picture of what it meant to be a royal guard. The hardest part, Marcus explained as he helped Ryan adjust his posture, isn't the physical strain. It's maintaining the discipline when everyone around you is trying to break it. Why do you think that is? Ryan thought carefully before answering. Because they don't understand what it represents? Partly, Marcus nodded, but also because some people fear what they cannot change. They see stillness as a challenge because they cannot find it within themselves. As the afternoon wore on, Ryan felt the physical demands of simply standing properly, of maintaining perfect posture. But more than that, he felt the weight of responsibility that came with wearing the uniform, even in this limited educational context. Finally, Marcus had Ryan remove the uniform, treating each piece with the respect it deserved as it was carefully returned to the garment bag. Your audience awaits your next video, Mr. Cooper, Marcus said. What will you show them? Ryan squared his shoulders, standing straighter even in his civilian clothes. The truth, he replied. About respect, about tradition, about the strength it takes to stand still when the world wants you to stumble, but most importantly, about how I was wrong and what I learned from it. Marcus extended his hand and Ryan shook it firmly. Then, perhaps, Marcus said, your moment of weakness has led to real strength. As Ryan turned to leave, David handed him one final note. Opening it, Ryan read, "Some stand guard at palace gates. Others stand guard over principles. Choose your post wisely." 1 week later, Ryan Cooper sat in his studio, staring at the blinking cursor on his computer screen. Around him, the trappings of his former life as a prankster, props, costumes, and elaborate equipment had been packed away. In their place sat a single professional camera and a simple black backdrop. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her hand hovering over the Go Live button. She had stuck by him through the past week, watching his transformation with a mixture of surprise and respect. Ryan nodded, adjusting his collar. He wore a simple button-down shirt, no flashy logos, no attention-grabbing colors. "They deserve the truth," he said quietly, "all of it." The live stream began, and immediately the viewer count started climbing. The chat exploded with a mixture of support, curiosity, and lingering anger from the palace incident. Ryan took a deep breath and began speaking. "Hey everyone, no jokes today, no pranks, no gimmicks, just truth." His voice was steady, carrying a new kind of confidence, not the brash showmanship of before, but something more genuine. "A week ago, I tried to make a royal guard move. Instead, he made me change." Over the next hour, Ryan shared everything. Today, the guard's response, the lessons learned, the weight of the uniform he'd been allowed to hold. He spoke about respect, tradition, and the strength found in stillness. Most importantly, he talked about the person he'd been and the person he was trying to become. "I built my career on pushing people past their limits," he admitted to his audience. "I never stopped to think about why some limits exist, why some traditions matter, why some people choose to stand firm when others try to make them fall." The chat, usually a chaos of emojis and jokes, grew more thoughtful. Viewers began sharing their own stories of times they'd disrespected traditions they didn't understand, of lessons learned the hard way. So here's what's going to change, Ryan continued. This channel isn't about pranks anymore. It's about understanding, about respect, about finding strength in standing for something greater than ourselves. He shared clips from his conversation with Marcus, approved by the palace for educational purposes. He showed the proper way to interact with the guards, the history behind their traditions, the meaning behind their discipline. The viewer count kept climbing, but for the first time, Ryan wasn't watching the numbers. He was watching the impact. 3 months later, Ryan's channel had transformed. Where once there were pranks and practical jokes, now there were documentaries about traditions from around the world. Each video focused on understanding and respect, featuring conversations with people who stood firm in their principles. The series Standing Guard became his most popular feature, not for its entertainment value, but for its honest exploration of dedication and duty. Episode 1, featuring his experience at the palace, had gone viral for entirely different reasons than his previous content. 6 months later, Ryan stood outside the palace gates again, but this time with official permission and a different purpose. He was filming the final episode of his documentary series about the Royal Guard, with Marcus Williams' full cooperation. The hardest part wasn't changing the content, Ryan explained to the camera. It was changing myself, understanding that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't in making someone move, but in choosing to stand firm yourself. The episode featured young viewers who had been inspired by Ryan's transformation. They spoke about how his new content had changed their perspective, made them think differently about respect and tradition. 1 year later, Ryan's studio had become a production house for content that celebrated dedication, discipline, and dignity. His former prank props had been donated to charity, replaced by books about history and tradition. The wall that once displayed subscriber count milestones now showed letters from viewers whose lives had been impacted by his new direction. Looking back, Ryan said in his anniversary video, I thought standing still was a sign of weakness. Now I understand it's often the hardest thing to do. Sometimes the biggest changes come from choosing not to move. His followers had changed too. While some of the prank enthusiasts had left, they were replaced by viewers seeking substance over spectacle. His comment sections, once filled with demands for more outrageous stunts, now hosted thoughtful discussions about respect, tradition, and personal growth. The final scene. On a quiet morning, much like the one that had changed everything, Ryan stood at the palace gates as a respectful visitor. Marcus Williams was at his post, as steadfast as ever. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Instead, Ryan offered a proper salute, one he had learned to execute perfectly over the past year. Marcus's eyes flickered briefly in recognition, and the smallest hint of a smile touched his lips. It was all the acknowledgement needed between two men who understood the power of standing firm. David Thompson, still serving as a plainclothes guard, approached Ryan afterward. You've learned to stand for something, he observed. I'm still learning, Ryan replied honestly. Every day, I understand a little more about what it means to hold your ground. And your followers? Ryan smiled. They're learning too. It turns out there are a lot of people hungry for something real, something worth standing for. That evening, Ryan posted his final video about the palace incident. It wasn't about pranks or viral moments. Instead, it was a simple message about transformation, about finding strength in stillness, about standing guard over what matters most. The video ended with a scene of the palace at sunset, the guards at their posts, unwavering. Ryan's voiceover spoke not just to his followers, but to anyone who had ever mistaken stillness for weakness. A year ago, I tried to make a guard move. Today, I understand why he stands still. Some things are worth standing for. Some traditions are worth protecting. Some lessons can only be learned when we stop trying to push others and start trying to better ourselves. The comment section filled with thousands of responses, but one stood out, a simple message from a verified account. "Stand firm, Sergeant Marcus Williams." 2 years later, the conference hall was packed, every seat filled with content. Creators, social media influencers, and digital entrepreneurs. The annual Digital Impact Summit had chosen an unlikely keynote speaker, Ryan Cooper, once known as the internet's most notorious prankster, now recognized as a leading voice in responsible content creation. Ryan stood at the podium, looking out at faces that reminded him of his former self, young, ambitious, hungry for views and validation. But now he had something different to offer them. 2 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the hushed audience. "I stood outside palace gates with a drone and a plan to go viral. Today, I stand before you with a different kind of plan. One that might not get you millions of views overnight, but will help you sleep better, knowing you're contributing something worthwhile to the world." The screens behind him displayed clips from his transformation. The failed prank, the guard's response, the learning process, and the evolution of his content. But more importantly, they showed the ripple effects. Dozens of other creators who had followed his lead, transforming their own content from exploitation to exploration, from pranks to purpose. "We talk about influence," Ryan continued, "but what are we influencing? Are we pushing people toward chaos or pulling them toward understanding? Are we breaking boundaries that protect or building bridges that connect?" In the audience, Emily, now his head of production, smiled proudly. The company they had built together, Stand Firm Productions, had become a mentor organization for content creators looking to make meaningful changes in their approach. Jake, who had traded his prank filming days for documentary work, operated the main camera, capturing this moment for their ongoing series about digital responsibility. "The metrics that matter," Ryan explained, "aren't always visible on a dashboard. They're in the messages we receive from people whose lives we've touched, in the traditions we've helped preserve, in the respect we've helped restore." He shared statistics that painted a powerful picture: a 40% decrease in prank content across major platforms, a surge in educational and cultural appreciation content, and most significantly, a marked reduction in incidents of disrespect at historical sites and traditional ceremonies worldwide. The Royal Guard had become a symbol of this change. Where once they were seen as targets for pranksters, they were now viewed as examples of unwavering dedication. Tourism at the palace had transformed. Visitors now came to learn rather than to provoke. But the real change, Ryan emphasized, isn't in the numbers, it's in the mindset. We've started asking different questions. Instead of, "How can I get a reaction?" as we're asking, "How can I show respect?" Instead of, "How can I go viral?" we're asking, "How can I add value?" After his speech, during the Q&A session, a young creator stood up. "But doesn't meaningful content get fewer views?" she asked. "Isn't it career suicide to stop doing what's trending?" Ryan smiled, understanding her concern all too well. "Let me show you something," he said, pulling up a new slide. It showed the analytics from his channel over the past 2 years, an initial drop in numbers followed by a steady, sustainable growth. "Yes, we lost viewers who were only there for the pranks, but we gained something more valuable, an audience that engages, that thinks, that grows with us. Our views might be lower, but our impact is immeasurably higher." He shared examples: schools using his content in their curriculum, cultural institutions partnering with creators to share their traditions, even governments consulting on how to bridge the gap between historical preservation and modern communication. During the networking session that followed, Ryan was approached by a familiar face. David Thompson, still serving with the Royal Guard, but now also involved in their public education initiatives. "You've started quite a movement," David observed, watching the crowd of creators eagerly discussing their plans for more meaningful content. "Not me," Ryan corrected him. "Marcus did. By choosing not to move, he moved an entire digital generation towards something better." David handed him an envelope. Inside was an invitation to speak at the Royal Guard's annual ceremony, an honor never before extended to a civilian. "Some changes," David said with a smile, "are worth standing guard over." That evening, Ryan received a message from Marcus Williams. "Keep standing firm." The simple phrase had become their shared motto, a reminder of the lessons learned and the principles worth protecting. Back in his office, Ryan looked at the wall of impact. Thousands of messages from creators and viewers whose lives had been changed by the new direction. One stood out, a letter from a young guard in training who had almost quit until he saw Ryan's transformation story. "The digital world moves fast," Ryan reflected in his evening video log, "but some things are meant to stand still. Some traditions anchor us in a sea of trends. Some principles remain unmoved, not because they can't change, but because they shouldn't." He shared plans for the future, a global documentary series about standing firm in various cultures, a mentorship program for creators transitioning to meaningful content, and a foundation to protect and promote traditional institutions in the digital age. 2 years ago, he concluded, I thought going viral meant making others break. Today, I know that true influence comes from helping others stand strong. Sometimes the most viral thing you can do is stand still for something that matters. The next morning, Ryan stood once again at the palace gates, not as a prankster or even as a documentarian, but as a student of stillness. He watched the changing of the guard with renewed appreciation, understanding now that in a world of constant movement, the power to remain unmoved might be the greatest strength of all. 5 years later, the Royal Military Academy's Grand Hall was filled to capacity, but complete silence reigned as Ryan Cooper took the stage. The audience, a mix of military personnel, digital influencers, and cultural leaders from around the world, had gathered for the first global summit on digital responsibility and traditional values. 5 years ago, Ryan began, his voice carrying the weight of experience. I stood before a guard with the intention of making him move. Today, I stand before you because he didn't. The screens behind him displayed images from around the world. Ancient ceremonies being respected rather than mocked. Traditions being preserved rather than pranked. Dignity being maintained rather than manipulated. Each image represented a story of change, a moment where someone chose to stand firm rather than give in to the pressure of viral fame. Sergeant Marcus Williams, now promoted to captain, sat in the front row, his presence as commanding as ever. Beside him were David Thompson, James Anderson, and Christopher Miller, the team that had orchestrated Ryan's transformation half a decade ago. What began as a personal lesson, Ryan continued, has become a global conversation about respect, tradition, and the power of standing firm in a world that constantly demands movement. He shared statistics that told a remarkable story. A 75% reduction in disruptive incidents at historical sites worldwide, a surge in educational content about cultural traditions, and a fundamental shift in how digital influence was measured and valued. Stand Firm Productions had grown into an international organization with offices in 12 countries. Their mission had expanded beyond content creation to include cultural preservation, digital ethics education, and what they called stillness training, teaching influencers and content creators the value of restraint and respect. Emily, now the Global Director of Impact, presented data showing how their work had influenced policy changes in social media platforms. Respect metrics had become standard analytics, measuring not just engagement, but the quality and impact of content. Jake, heading their documentary division, shared clips from their latest project, a series following traditional guardians from different cultures. The Swiss Guard at the Vatican, temple guards in Kyoto, indigenous heritage protectors in Australia. Each story echoed the same theme, the power of standing firm. During the presentation, Ryan introduced a new initiative that brought everything full circle. Today, we're launching the Guardians Fellowship, he announced, a program that pairs content creators with traditional institutions, helping them understand what's worth preserving and how to share it respectfully with the world. The first class of fellows included former pranksters, viral stars, and digital influencers, all committed to transforming their platforms into forces for cultural appreciation and understanding. Captain Marcus Williams took the stage next, his first public speaking engagement in 25 years of service. The audience leaned forward, eager to hear from the man whose stillness had started a movement. Discipline, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear, is not about refusing to move. It's about knowing what's worth standing still for. He shared insights from his years of service, explaining how the principles of guard duty applied to the digital age. In an era of constant motion, he continued, stillness becomes revolutionary. In a world of endless noise, silence becomes powerful. In a culture of reaction, non-reaction becomes strength. The impact of their combined message was profound. Social media platforms began introducing respect ratings alongside their traditional metrics. Content creators started incorporating traditional values into their work. Even advertisers shifted their approach, valuing dignity over disruption. Ryan's original viral fail video, now a case study in digital ethics courses, had evolved from a moment of shame into a teaching tool. Universities worldwide used it to demonstrate the transformation of digital culture and the power of principled resistance. The standing guard movement, as it came to be known, spread beyond social media. Companies adopted stillness protocols for crisis management. Schools introduced digital dignity courses. Even governments began consulting with Ryan's team on preserving traditions in the digital age. Later that evening, at a private gathering, Ryan and Marcus stood at the palace gates where their story had begun. The setting sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, much like that fateful morning 5 years ago. "Did you know?" Ryan asked. "Did you sense that your stillness would create such movement?" Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "In the Guard, we have a saying. We stand not just for what is, but for what could be. Your transformation was not just about learning to respect tradition. It was about understanding that some things are worth standing still for." David Thompson joined them, holding a tablet displaying their latest impact metrics. "The numbers are impressive," he said, "but the real change is immeasurable. How do you quantify dignity restored, respect renewed, traditions preserved?" Ryan nodded, understanding now what he couldn't have grasped 5 years ago. The greatest influence, he reflected, doesn't come from making others move, but from showing them what's worth standing still for. As they watched the changing of the Guard, the same ceremony that Ryan had once tried to disrupt, a new generation of tourists observed with respect and appreciation. Children asked thoughtful questions instead of planning pranks. Phones were raised not to mock, but to learn. The evening concluded with the announcement of a permanent exhibition at the palace, The Power of Standing Still. It would tell the story not just of Ryan's transformation, but of a digital generation learning to value tradition, respect, and the courage to stand firm. 10 years later, the morning sun painted the palace walls in golden light, just as it had done a decade ago when a prankster tried to make a Guard move. But this morning was different. Today, thousands gathered not to watch a spectacle, but to witness a ceremony that would bridge the gap between tradition and the digital age. Ryan Cooper, now in his late 30s, stood before the palace gates in a tailored suit, his demeanor reflecting the gravity of the occasion. Beside him stood retired Captain Marcus Williams, still carrying himself with the same unwavering dignity that had changed Ryan's life 10 years ago. A decade ago, Ryan addressed the assembled crowd and the millions watching online. "I came here to break something I didn't understand. Today, we're here to build something that will last for generations to come." They were inaugurating the Global Center for Digital Ethics and Traditional Values, a pioneering institution housed in a renovated wing of the palace grounds. The center would serve as both a physical and virtual space where content creators, traditional institutions, and cultural guardians could come together to shape the future of digital responsibility. Emily, now CEO of Stand Firm Global, presented the center's mission statement: to preserve the stillness that anchors us in a world of constant motion. The words were etched in stone at the entrance, a permanent reminder of the lesson that had started it all. Jake, who had become a renowned documentary filmmaker, premiered his masterpiece, The Stillness Revolution, a comprehensive look at how one guard's unwavering stance had triggered a worldwide transformation in digital culture. The documentary featured interviews with hundreds of content creators who had followed Ryan's path of transformation. Each had their own story of discovering what was worth standing still for. A former shock YouTuber who now produced series about endangered cultural practices. A prankster who had become a digital ambassador for indigenous traditions. A viral sensation who now taught digital ethics at prestigious universities. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus Williams shared his perspective for the first time in a public forum. Standing at the podium, his presence commanded attention just as it had at his guard post years ago. "People often ask me," he began, "what I was thinking that day when a young man tried to make me move. The truth is, I wasn't thinking about him at all. I was thinking about every guard who had stood at that post before me, every tradition they had protected, every principle they had upheld." He turned to Ryan with a slight smile. "Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't in refusing to move. It's in showing others why standing still matters." The ceremony continued with the unveiling of a unique installation, a holographic guard post where visitors could experience the physical and mental discipline required to stand watch. The simulation had been developed with input from retired guards, helping people understand the depth of commitment behind the seemingly simple act of standing still. Ryan then announced the launch of the Digital Guardian program, a global initiative that would train content creators in what they now called mindful influence. The program would combine traditional values with modern communication, teaching creators how to engage audiences while respecting boundaries and preserving dignity. David Thompson, James Anderson, and Christopher Miller, the plainclothes guards who had orchestrated Ryan's transformation, were honored with the first Guardians of Change Awards, recognizing their role in sparking a global movement. "These men," Ryan explained, "taught me that true power doesn't lie in making others move, but in knowing why we stand firm. They showed me that some traditions aren't obstacles to be overcome, but foundations to be built upon." The ceremony reached its emotional peak when Ryan and Marcus together unveiled the transformation point, a marked spot at the palace gates where Ryan had once tried to provoke a reaction. Now it served as a reminder of the moment when stillness proved stronger than spectacle. A plaque read, "On this spot, tradition stood firm and transformation began. May all who stand here understand the power of unwavering dignity." As the day drew to a close, Ryan shared the announcement that would complete the circle of his journey. 10 years ago, I tried to break protocol for views. Today, I'm honored to announce that I've been appointed as the first digital guardian liaison to the Royal Guard, a position created to bridge the gap between traditional institutions and the digital world. The audience erupted in applause, but the most meaningful response came from Marcus, a simple, dignified nod that carried the weight of a decade of transformation. Later that evening, as the crowds dispersed, Ryan stood at his old filming spot, remembering the person he had been. Emily joined him, tablet in hand showing the day's statistics. The ceremony reached over 100 million viewers, she reported. But more importantly, look at the engagement metrics. 97% positive responses, with thousands of creators pledging to join the Digital Guardian program. Ryan smiled, but his attention was on a young content creator he spotted near the gates, camera in hand. The creator caught his eye and gave a respectful nod, not looking for a reaction, but seeking to understand the power of stillness. "That's what it's all about," Ryan said softly. "Not the numbers, not the views, but the understanding that passes from one generation to the next." As the sun set on this milestone day, Ryan and Marcus stood together at the guard post where their story had begun. No words were needed. Their shared silence spoke volumes about the journey they had taken and the legacy they had created. "Ready for another decade?" Marcus asked finally. Ryan squared his shoulders, standing a little straighter. "Some things," he replied, "are worth standing still for, forever." Click now to begin your next journey of transformation. These stories await your discovery, ready to build upon the foundation that Ryan's story has laid. Remember to like, subscribe, and join our community of mindful creators and respectful observers. Together, we're standing firm for what matters most.